Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of going through the id Vault in Quake 2 Remastered. If you haven't checked out part 1, please go check that out as I covered the first section in the id Vault concept art. Now section 2, development, has a lot to get through, so let's get this started right away. I'm not going to explain what this is all about. If you need to know that, please, again, go watch part 1. Alright, so we got a lot to go through here in the development section. The first one is the console print ad. So let's read that real quick. A scanned proof of a magazine advertisement for the console ports of Quake 2, undated. The faux retro style of advertising has been a recurring theme in advertising throughout the 90s. Alright, let's just quickly check this out. You can click these and zoom in. The Quake 2 meat market. Alright, we got some screenshots from the early days of the console ports here. Something blurred out, not quite sure what that is. Maybe some publishing information, and since now Bethesda's the publisher, they can't show that or something like that. Very cool, very cool. Alright, HUD faces. Similar to the Ranger face in the original Quake, in Q2 tests, the public beta version of Quake 2 originally included a face at the bottom left of the screen that reflected the damage state of the character and even indicated from which direction the player was being hit. That's actually really interesting. That's right, in Quake 1, you had the Ranger here, and in Quake 2, you have Bitterman, who it looks like maybe they had a grid system here, and they were slowly but surely replacing Ranger's face with Bitterman's face, and not all of it was completed. So they scrapped that for whatever reason. Still pretty cool to see nevertheless. Alright, early HUD. This early HUD is close to what we shipped with Q2 tests, the public beta version of Quake 2. Ultimately, we opted for a cleaner HUD without the damaged faces or background for the actual health, armor, and ammo values. Alright, so here we are in the early HUD. So yeah, you can see the face down here, armor and ammo. They have these little green and orange backgrounds. This is actually very similar to what we ended up with in the final version of Quake 2. Very cool to see nevertheless. Stragos area map. A marked up version of the Stragos planet surface is seen panned around during the cinematic sequences. Much of the 3D modeling and texture is low quality as it was never intended to be viewed outside of the 320 by 240 cinematic videos. The path is roughly the path taken of the player throughout the main campaign. This reminds me a lot of the maps in Doom. When you're going from base to base, you conquer one area and then it shows you on the map where you are, and then you go to the next area. That's what this reminds me of. It's kind of cool that they had that same idea in Quake 2. Very neat. Alright, Stragos lettering. The stylized Strag alphabet used throughout the game on various textures in the environment. The lettering was pulled from this example image, baked directly into the texture. Also included are some custom ligature pairs, some of which went unused in the final version. So yeah, I always thought it was cool how the Stragos alphabet was basically an English alphabet. It just was stylized. You could kind of see the Q is like Quake. So I always thought that was cool. It's good because, you know, you could read it even when you're running through these levels. You could kind of read the signs. But yeah, you see the ER, the IO, the AE, and the AI. That was definitely never used in the game from my memory. Alright, Text Paint. Text Paint was an internal tool created for the purposes of creating skin textures for models by drawing directly on 3D models. While artists have access to a wealth of tools today for dealing with complex UV mapping, tools were primitive back then, and tools like Text Paint helped the id artists create more complex models compared to the first title. Alright, this one's going to allow me to drop a little industry knowledge on you guys. So, when you have a 3D model, you have to unwrap it into a 2D surface, and that is what is called a UV map. And so essentially you have a 2D surface that you then paint on top of, and then you have to rewrap your 3D model with the UV, and that's how your 3D model gets textured. What's really great about a tool like Text Paint, especially back in the 90s, is it would allow you to paint right on top of the 3D model, so things like seams, for example, can get hidden. That's a huge advantage. Because if you see the leg right here on this edge, and the leg right here on this edge, in a 2D surface, if you paint this a certain color with all this detail, and this a certain color with all this detail, it's very easy to have a seam on the edge, especially at this resolution. The pixels aren't going to line up great. However, if you have the ability to paint on top of the seam in a 3D fashion, it's going to be a lot easier to hide that seam. So that's what's a huge advantage of Text Paint is. So very, very cool to see that. Alright, the next one here is E397 Lab. By June 1997, Quake 2 was in the process of switching game code from Quake C to native code. The version at E3 most closely resembles Quake 2 as we know it today, while internally a version of Quake 2 existed that more resembled the original game. This HUD, using Quake 1 graphics, can be seen in official screenshots as it was one of the last things to be implemented. Being shown in the midst of a major rewrite, the AI was simple and the player would often get caught up on walls and other surfaces. So yes, this is from the E3 video game showcase from 1997. You can see the Ranger face down here in the bottom left instead of Bitterman, but still really cool to see nevertheless. Now this next one, spoiler alert, you can actually click this and play the maps. I figured that out because unfortunately I was reading Discord and somebody spoiled it for me, so I read that. However, I'm not going to do that for this video because from what I understand, it's a couple levels long and it's just going to be too much. So we're going to come back to this at a later time for another video. I'm going to play through these maps, but hey, I'm going to still read you guys the blurb and we'll go down to the next one. These are the original maps included in the trade show demo version of the game, modified to work on the final version of the engine. While they won't be the same experience as playing the original version, these levels accurately represent the state of the game at this time. So very cool. We'll come back and check that out another time. Alright, now this one's a video. In September 1997, Quake 2 would be shown in London at the European Computer Trade Show. This video was captured from an included demo on that original build. Well, let's check this out. And if it's really long, we'll probably stop it and keep going, but we can at least check it out for a minute or so here. So the first main thing that I noticed that's different is the sound effects. Sound effects of the enemies shooting. There's no death sound effects. The machine gun's very similar sound. It's mostly the blaster that didn't sound like what we got. This is definitely an iteration of the very first map of the game. The explosions don't look as good. The giblet sound, I don't know if you heard it, but it was the same as Quake 1. So we'll get through this first level here and then we'll stop the video. Alright, more playable maps here. I'm not going to play these again. I think this will be great content for a later date. A playable version of the maps included in the above build. These levels represent roughly 3 months of progress as the game progresses towards being complete in November. Despite being so close to the end date, large changes in the levels can be observed. So yes, again, we will check that out at a later date in a future video. Alright, Early Technician. An early version of the Technician, with a best attempt at fitting what the skin would have been at the time of development. This iteration of the Technician sported an array of prodding and grabbing tools, popping out and fidgeting about at random. Alright, let's go check this out. Well, that's cool. I can actually spin it here while we're looking at it. So yeah, the textures were obviously very rudimentary at this point. They were just getting the animations going first. Early Flyer, a near final version of the Flyer, which would be completed 10 days after this iteration. A simpler texture and an in-progress skin with a more mechanical take, while the final Flyer would take on more organic forms, including a face. Alright, so yeah, you've got kind of some skin here, but they kind of went away from this. I mean, this one kind of has red eyes, so it's maybe a face. Anyways. Oh, it's spinning like crazy. Very cool to see regardless. Early Tank. The tank was one of the earlier enemies created in Quake 2. This iteration has in-progress skins and animations, but largely resemble the final version of the tank. Yep, that definitely looks a lot like what we got. I don't know if you guys remember these, but they're beasts. Oh my gosh, they're hard to take down. Take forever. Early Mutant. The mutant originally was to be more of a bipedal enemy, as the animations in this version show. Several alternate skins were prototyped, with this particularly red one chosen to display here. This version of the mutant is dated as late as September 1997, less than 2 months before the final version. Very cool. You know, this reminds me a lot, obviously Quake 2 was first, but this reminds me a lot of the Trigen in Far Cry, the original Far Cry. So, very cool to see. It's cool to see the animations. Gnorta. The Gnorta is an enemy that was cut before a skin or animation was created. This model with no skin or animations is all that remains. It appears to be an enemy with a turtle-like shell and would scuttle low to the ground. Definitely has like a StarCraft 2 Zerg-like vibe. Still cool to see. Alright, the Shocker. The Shocker is another enemy that did not make it past an initial prototype model. It appears to integrate aspects of the infantry, gunner, and berserker. However, it is also unknown what role it may have served and was seemingly cut relatively early on in development. The only thing I'll say about this is I really like low poly modeling and how they paid so much attention to the silhouette of models, and they really could maximize their low polys and get the most out of them. You could tell from a mile away what enemy you're fighting because of the silhouette. I always thought that that's really cool, and it's definitely an art style in and of itself, is to be able to low poly model successfully and have it be readable to the player. Early Blaster. This early iteration of the Blaster's first-person view model featuring a completely different silhouette with sharper edges and a more traditional angled design. The less bulbous design create a much smaller weapon when viewed from the player. Oh yeah, I could definitely see how it looks a lot smaller than what we end up with in Quake 2. This kind of just looks like one of those scanning checkout guns at Target. Beep, beep. Early Strogg ship. An early version of a Strogg fighter ship from before skinning of the model started. This model would stay relatively true to the final version and is similar to the ship depicted in the hangar concept art. And again, we saw that in the last video, but it's cool to see how that concept art translates down to the 3D model, even in a low poly version. Alright, early male player. This early version of the male player model is relatively close to the final version visually. Many of the animations would be unused, however, with variants for swimming horizontally, elaborate death animations featuring lost limbs, and animations for pushing objects around in the environments. Quake 3 Arena would eventually feature unique swimming animations, however, it is likely a lot of these animations went unused in Quake 2 due to time. Let's check this out. Oh, his arm's off right there. His head's off. Grenade throw. Taking some shots. Running. Salute. Little idle animation there. Ooh, there's a swim. In the water, treading water. Grabbing the groin. Very cool to see some of these animations for sure. Early female player. An early mesh of the female player model featuring a different hairstyle and an early version of her silhouette. You know, I don't know, the first thing that pops into my head is actually Minx from Quake 3. I'll put a picture of her up to the left, but that immediately is what comes to mind with this player model because of the hair. Early infantry pale. 2 skin variations of the infantry that both map to the final model. A paler variation and a camouflage skin. Both of these would go unused in favor of the final single skin. Oh, is this the chain gunner? This is the chain gunner infantry guy. Okay. Yeah, I definitely prefer the other one. Here's the camo one. It has the same blurb, so I'm not going to read it again. You know, what would have been cool is if they just would have used all of them and just made them variations. I think that would have just added a little bit more flavor to the game. But, you know, back then there were a lot of size limits and stuff, so you gotta cut where you can and save it where you can, you know. Early chain gun. The chain gun went through a few iterations before being finished, including versions with visible hands. This one features a smaller barrel but showing more of the gun's base itself before eventually becoming just a larger, higher resolution barrel. The chain gun's design would ultimately be finalized in June 1997, making this one of the earlier examples of a weapon new to Quake 2. Oh, man, I hate to say it, but I actually like this chain gun better. I just like this detail. You know, the current chain gun doesn't have any of those details. Early Shotgun 1. 3 variations of the in-progress shotgun skin dated from June 1997. Different textures were being tested before settling on the cooler tones without the rust texture. This texture would then be refined, withdrawn on lighting and lights to increase visual interest along the side of the gun. Yeah, I see the rust. Early Shotgun 2. Oh yeah, that one's really rusty. Oh, I forgot we can hide the controls. Let's zoom out. Oh yeah, I definitely like the shotgun that we have in Quake in Quake 2 over the rusted one. Early Shotgun 3. It's basically the same as the second one. Unused fighter ship. 2 unused types of strong ships. Not much is known about the intended use of them, and dates on these files suggest they may have been intended for a post-release expansion pack. Cool. And then here's an unused transport ship. Early Invulnerability 1. 3 variations of the Invulnerability power-up. At this point, the model would be finalized, however, the skin was still being worked on. These skins would not be finalized until October 1997, only 1 month before the game would be finished. Alright, let's see what they're working on here. Okay. Oh, a red version. And a gold version. I like this one. And now that I'm looking at it, I can't even remember what the version they ended up with. I'll put a picture up with it right here. Unused scope. Player inventory and upgrades were originally intended to be a bigger part of the game. The original purpose of the scope was to enable zooming of your gun at a cost of 1 cell per zoom. Sights would enable auto-aiming at enemies for a limited amount of shots, similar to how the silencer works. Finally, the remote camera would act as you'd expect. It would allow you to view an area through the camera and would beep in the player's speakers if damaged. Other power-ups included ideas such as a Geiger counter that helped identify close enemies, speed boosts, personal teleporters, and low gravity belts. Some of these ideas would be revisited in Quake 3 Arena. Let's check these out. Unused scope. Unused sights. Unused remote camera. Doesn't look like they textured this one. Unused nuclear booster. Huh. Cool. This stim pack would go on to be redesigned to look more like the adrenaline power-up. This item would make it pretty far with a very complete skin before being replaced with the final version. Oh, I see how the adrenaline power-up's a little bit more readable though, even though that definitely looks pretty nice. These flares would be used with the flare gun, whose model would eventually go on to be reused for the grapple. The flare gun was one of the earlier weapon concepts present in the early versions of Quake 2, simply lighting up the area for a short amount of time when shot. You know, it's not a terrible weapon. I mean, Quake 2 wasn't super dark, but it definitely had some pretty dark areas that this would have been useful in. Unused nuke. The nuke was an early grenade that would be thrown by the player. As the name implies, this item would be thrown by a player, and then after a short countdown it would explode, taking out a large area of whoever was nearby. The nuke was present in early versions of Quake 2 when it was still running under Quake 1 engine, but was cut before release. Okay. It looks almost identical to the nuclear booster up here. Unused small bullets. In Doom and Quake, ammo came in two variants, large and small. Quake 2 was originally planned to add a third medium variant, but by the time development ended, both large and small ammo types would be removed in favor of one level pickup per ammo type. Most of these ammo types were far along before being cut, likely to reduce the amount of pickups, with Quake 2 having more ammo types compared to the original Quake. Alright, so some small bullets. Alright, all these have the same blurb, so we'll just get through these. Here's a large bullet box that was unused. Small shells. Large shells. Unused small cells. Unused large cells. Unused small slugs. Unused large slugs. Oh, they didn't even have a texture for it. And an unused small rockets. Just one, looks like. Alright everybody, that's the end of the Id Vault Part 2 where we just covered the development section. Tomorrow I'm going to release Part 3 where we're going to talk about the weapons. If you're enjoying this content, please give me a like and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss when the next parts come up. Thanks again for watching everybody, I really appreciate it. I'm SaltyOctopus and I will see you next time.